Every time I look at those boots in my shoedrobe, I just like sit down and kind of reevaluate my life, and it's just like, yeah. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So I have a pretty extensive shoe collection and I consider myself to be a bit of a shoe expert, like not to toot my own horn or anything. So I thought for this week's video I would do a little sort of like a masterclass on how to pick the perfect pair of shoes, whether that's heels, boots or anything in between. So let's get started. Starting off with ankle boots, when you're picking out the perfect pair of ankle boots there are quite a few things you need to consider. The heel height, the shoe width, the shaft height and the shaft width. So, starting off with the heel height, for example, I am a heels girl, even though I'm 6 foot tall, I wear heels like pretty much all the time. And with ankle boots, it's kind of no exception, so I tend to pick ankle boots that have a bit of a heel on them. I'd say like on average I'll pick out a pair of ankle boots with a kind of maybe like a 3 to 3.5 inch heel, just because I find that most comfortable. It's the perfect sort of everyday heel height in terms of boots, and also it gives me like a bit of elevation, which kind of adds that touch of elegance that I think you get with a heel, but also kind of keeping that comfort aspect as well. If you are just starting out in terms of heels, then you might want to go for something lower, so something like a 1.5 inch heel to 2 inch heel, I would say, is a good sort of like starting point. You want to make sure that you can actually walk in them without looking like you're about to topple over, or actually toppling over, because that would just be super embarrassing, like especially if you're out in public. Alternatively, you could actually be more of a flats kind of girl. The one thing that I would say in terms of picking out flat boots is that you should make sure they're not 100% flat. If the sole is too thin, then it will literally feel like you're just walking on the bare pavement, and if you're walking on tarmac, then that's going to be very, very, very ouchy, which is not what you want when you're going for comfort. Moving on to the width of the boot, you need to consider the width of your foot, obviously, because your foot goes into the boot. I tend to have the issue where the boot doesn't hug my foot in the way that I would like it to, so it tends to be quite on the wide side, which is how I figured out that I've got narrow feet. Now, if you've got standard feet, you'll probably find that boots or shoes tend to fit you pretty much perfectly in terms of the foot width, like your foot is perfectly encased within the shoe. There isn't too much slip and your foot is perfectly sort of held in place. If you have wider feet, however, you might find that your foot is a little bit squashed and they're quite uncomfortable, or you might find that you struggle to get your foot into the shoe. So once you've figured out what your kind of foot width is, that's how you go about picking the shoes that are perfect for your foot width. I haven't found many retailers, if I'm being completely honest, that sell narrow fit shoes, so I will kind of look at the shoe and also look at the reviews. So if I'm looking at a pair of shoes on, say, like the ASOS website, and people have left reviews and they say these shoes are super narrow fitting, they were super tight, that's how I'll figure out that those shoes might be a good pair for me to buy, because I have feet that are on the narrower side. On the other hand, if you have sort of wide feet and you're kind of looking at the reviews and people are saying that the shoes were super wide and they were sort of slipping off their feet, then that's an indication that they might be sort of better suited to your feet. There are a few kind of places that sell wide fit shoes. I think ASOS is one of those examples, but you also have kind of like specialised shoe shops that sell shoes for wider feet. So I think places like Evans, or I think like Simply Be as well, have sort of wide fitting shoes. If you're standard width, then obviously you can pretty much buy shoes from everywhere, which is like great for you, so lucky you. But if you do have feet that are more on the narrow or wide fitting side, then you might just have to be a bit more conscious of what sort of shoes you buy and also where you pick them up from as well. Just a few pointers in terms of shoe styles as well. If you have narrower feet, then you might be able to get away with things like pointed toe shoes, just because they sort of taper at the front and they tend to fit a little bit sort of more narrow. But if you have wider feet, unless you are getting specifically wide fitting pointed toe shoes or boots, as I was saying, because this is an ankle boot section, then I would probably say you should tend to avoid pointed toe ankle boots, just because if you have wide feet already and you're trying to buy them from the standard section, anything that is sort of narrow in the sort of toe area is probably going to be super uncomfortable for you. So if you have wide feet, I would say probably go for styles more like a square toe, for example, or even maybe like a sort of round toe, just to give your foot a bit of extra room and just like make sure that they fit really comfortably. The final thing to consider in terms of picking out the perfect pair of ankle boots is the shaft height and the shaft width. I've seen different sort of styles of ankle boots, so you can get the ones that sit just on the ankle bone, or you can get the ones that sit kind of like halfway between your ankle and your sort of shin area. It really is down to personal preference. Personally, I found that I don't really like ankle boots that kind of sit just on the ankle. With shorter styles, there's something about them that just kind of like cuts your ankle off, I think, in the wrong location, and can make your ankles look a little bit chunky or just make your legs look really short, which isn't necessarily a good thing in my opinion. With the shaft width, as with the shoe width, you need to consider the width of your ankles. So I have narrow feet, I also have basically toothpick ankles, so super narrow ones as well. There's often like a massive gap at the front and at the back of the ankle boot, which If you're looking to make your ankles look slimmer, can actually be a good thing, but because I've already got toothpick ankles, I don't think it's necessarily the most flattering style. Obviously, if you have wider ankles, then you'd kind of do the opposite, so go for boot styles that are either, again, sort of made for a wider ankle specifically, or just ones that are sort of generally made a little bit bigger. So again, the review section can be a really useful place to look for things like this. If I'm thinking about my most perfect fitting pair of ankle boots, it's probably a pair that I have from June. So they kind of tick all the boxes in terms of the points that I just went through with you guys. So they're like a 3 to 3.5 inch heel. They're really narrow on the foot, really narrow on the ankle, and they just fit really beautifully. I can wear them for extended periods of time without being like really uncomfortable, and yeah, they're just an absolute delight to wear. Moving on to knee-high boots, when you're trying to pick out the perfect pair, I think some of the same rules kind of apply that I sort of mentioned with ankle boots, but there are a couple of differences which I just wanted to go through with you guys. So the first one is the shaft height, and the second one is the shaft width. Now, with the shaft height, you kind of need to make sure that you're picking the shaft height according to your height, but also especially your leg length. Now, I'm super tall and I'm basically all legs, so when I was looking for the perfect pair of knee highs, it took me quite a while to find them. I feel like the perfect pair of knee high boots should sit just under the knee, no higher because obviously that would be an over the knee pair of boots, and also no lower because I just think it's super unflattering. So when you're shopping for knee highs, the thing that I would say is it's best to probably try them on in store if you can. I know like shopping in store can be an absolute pain, but if you want to avoid a lot of frustration, because I went through this when I was looking for the perfect pair of knee highs, the best thing to do is to try them on in store. If you are like me and you struggle to find things, or you just don't want to go into store, then just pay attention to the details on the website. A lot of stores, when you're looking at knee high boots, will provide the shaft height in the description. If they don't though, don't be afraid to like get in touch with them and ask. It might be a lot of trial and error. You might cry a few times because you might think that you won't find the perfect pair, especially if you're on the taller side, because it seems like apparently when it comes to shoe or boot shopping, tall women don't exist, but that's a story for another day. But when you find the perfect pair, I promise you it'll be totally worth it, because I just think they're like such a wardrobe staple for like the autumn and winter season. Whereas with an ankle boot, obviously you're looking at the shaft width for your ankle, here you're looking at the shaft width for your calf. I feel like in terms of leg, I'm basically just like Miss Narrow all over. So I've got a narrow foot, a narrow ankle, and also a narrow calf. I find that with knee-high boots, they do tend to look better in my opinion when they're a little bit more on the slouchy and loose side, if they're a heeled boot. So I think that if you're going for like a flat boot, they can look a lot better, or even just equally as nice when they're sort of more form-fitting to the leg. So again, I'm sure there's an official way that you measure this. I will try and link it for you in the description if I can find it. But I just tend to use the sort of trial and error, so I can see that my legs obviously are narrower because, you know, I have working eyes. But also I just kind of figure this out in terms of how boots would fit me. So if I tried to go for like a fitted pair of knee-high boots, I would notice that they'd be quite loose around the sort of calf area. So that's an indication that I've got narrow calves. And on the other hand, if you find that when you're trying on knee highs, they tend to be sort of really sort of tight on the calf area, and that's an indication that you have sort of wider calves. In which case, again, you might need to go to a sort of specialised, either the sort of wide fitting section of a standard website like ASOS, or to a specialised shoe store like somewhere like Evans, like I mentioned previously. My perfect pair of knee highs is a pair that I got almost about 10 years ago. I got them from ASOS, but they're Kurt Geiger. I think they're like Miss KG. Come up to just under the knees, the perfect shaft height. They're more of like a slouchy kind of fit. I think they're about 3 to 3.5 inches, and I've had them, like I said, for about 10 years. I get super excited to get them out every winter. They go really nicely with jeans, with leggings, with things like skirts and dresses. And yeah, they're basically just my dream pair of knee-high boots. Moving on to over the knee boots. Since we are still in the boots category, there are a lot of similarities that I mentioned with the ankle boot and also the knee-high boot. But I would say the main sort of differences are the shaft height, the shaft width, and also the material. I would say the perfect pair of over the knee boots should hit you about 1 to 2 inches above the knee. If unlike me, your legs are a little bit on the shorter side, then you just need to look out for leg length. So you want to make sure that when you're picking out over the knee boots for shorter legs, they are just over your knee. But the cool thing about over the knee boots is that you can kind of have two approaches. So you can either pick a sort of form-fitting pair, and they kind of have like more of a sort of sexy, glam, high fashion kind of vibe, or you can pick a pair that's more sort of like loose fitting, kind of slouchy, and they kind of look more like relaxed. Not really casual, but like semi-casual. Like, I just threw on these boots before I left the house and I didn't put any effort into this outfit at all, even though I low-key planned it like weeks and weeks in advance. Finally, you need to be mindful of the material, and this is really important for making sure that your over-the-knee boots actually stay over the knee. If you're picking out a slouchy pair, it's generally better to go for like a stiffer sort of fabric, so either like a real leather or a faux leather, just to make sure that they kind of hold their shape and they kind of sit up on their own without needing your leg to support them. If you pick out a fabric pair in a sort of slouchy material, the likelihood is they're going to keep slipping all the way down your leg, and it's just going to be very annoying. and I just think it's not a look, you know. If you pick out a form-fitting pair, you need to pick out a pair that is stretchy, and the stretch needs to be tight on your leg. I'm not saying tight so that it's like restricting your movement or cutting off blood flow. I'm just saying tight enough that like it kind of hugs your leg and stays in place. Honestly, I wish someone were around to give me this advice when I was picking out a pair of over-the-knee boots, because I bought this pair from Jeffrey Campbell when I was at uni, and they were pretty expensive, especially being a student as I was at the time. And honestly, those boots are like the biggest regret of my life, because they're made out of like a beautiful sort of like velvet slash faux suede material. I've been looking at the reviews and people were saying, oh, I have really skinny legs and they're perfect, like they don't fall down. But I would find that I would wear them out in public and I'd be walking and I'd walk a few steps and they just start rolling down. Every time I look at those boots in my shoe robe, I just like sit down and kind of reevaluate my life, and it's just like, yeah. In terms of my perfect pair of over-the-knee boots, I actually have two. So I have a cream pair, which is in a sort of faux leather material, and they're more sort of loose fitting, and they're just perfect, like the perfect heel height, perfectly sort of fitted in terms of like they're long enough for my legs, and they're just super comfortable. Especially, I think they're maybe like a 3.9 inch heel, but I wore them out the Saturday just gone, and I was walking around for sort of like 6 hours and they were pretty comfortable, so I'm really happy with them. I tend to wear them with more sort of like 70s style outfits, or just outfits with a bit more of an edge. Whereas I have a second pair that is more form-fitting, so they're from Stradivarius and they're like a black faux leather. Super stretchy, which is why I picked them out, because they're perfect for like my sort of really slim ankle slash calf area. So I guess when I'm trying to look more sort of dressed up and like glamorous, that's when I tend to wear those ones. Moving on to heels, this is more like a general category, but I decided to include it anyway just because I feel like it's quite a popular one. So if you're looking for the perfect pair of heels, there are quite a few things that you need to consider. So first of all, the heel height, obviously. Secondly, the toe box shape. Thirdly, the insole slash outsole. And last of all, the heel type. Thinking of heel height, I've touched upon this in the previous categories, but it kind of depends on the occasion that you want to wear the heels for. So I would generally say for everyday wear, try and limit yourself to heels that are low to mid heels. So between, I'd say 1.5 inches and 3 inches. And then for special occasions, I think you can go from anything from 3.5 inches up all the way to, I guess, however high you can go. If you're picking out a pair of high heels for like sort of occasion wear, you also need to know your limit. So I can do a heel, like I said before, on a day-to-day basis I'll wear like a 3 inch to 3.5 inch heel, but I know that my personal limit when it comes to high heels is 4 inches, because I have a particular pair of heels in my shoe robe that I bought a few years ago. I've worn them a few times for shoots and they're absolutely gorgeous. However, every time I wear these shoes, it literally feels like my ankle is going to snap in half. And it's really weird because I can wear like 4 inch heels with absolutely no issues at all. But for some reason, like 4.5 inch heels and up, like it's just an absolute no from me. So you need to bear that in mind. I just feel like heels are supposed to be, obviously they're beautiful, but they're supposed to be functional as well. And at the end of the day, it's all very well and good for you to be wearing like a beautiful pair of princess heels. But if you're walking around, or rather hobbling around like Rumpelstiltskin, then I'm kind of like, what's the point? Moving on to toe box shape, this is really important as well. Now ladies, I know pointed toe shoes are super like stylish and elegant and whatever else, but if I'm being completely honest, I don't think they're the best for your feet. Purely because the way that they're cut into that sort of really sharp point is really unnatural to the shape of your foot. Like I think I touched upon this in my previous video. Generally speaking, your biggest toe is the longest toe and then they kind of go down in a slant. But the way that pointed toe shoes are cut kind of like squishes your toes together like towards the middle of your foot, which isn't obviously how your feet are supposed to sit naturally. And I think it's fine to wear them on occasion, but generally speaking, if you're wearing them on a day-to-day basis, you're probably going to end up with a load of podiatry issues, and I honestly just don't think it's worth it. It's probably in your best interest to pick a toe box shape that's maybe like a square, maybe like an almond toe or a round toe, just so that your foot is allowed to like sit in a more kind of natural position. The heels are not the most comfortable things in the world. You're kind of, I guess, walking on your tiptoes for quite an extended period of time. So you need to make sure that when you're picking out heels, you pick out a pair with a padded insole. I think in terms of an insole, you should be able to see the sort of outline of the insole in the insole of the shoe, if that makes sense. If you look at the insole of the shoe and it looks completely flat and there's zero cushioning, there's no point in buying them, because it's just going to feel like you're walking on a hard surface and you'll end up again with things like corns and calluses. With the outsole, the main thing you want to look out for is just to make sure that the outsole is thick enough. There's not really like a hard and fast rule, but I think generally speaking you can tell if a sole is thin. Like what I tend to do when I buy shoes, or especially heels, is I will walk around the house in them a little bit just to make sure that they feel kind of comfortable, and if I feel like I'm feeling too much floor, then I'll generally return them. Finally, moving on to heel type, there are quite a few of these, but I'm just going to cover the main three. So the first one is block heel. They still give you that sort of like elegant touch because obviously your foot is slightly elevated, but they also add the comfort that you don't necessarily get with a thinner heel. I think block heels are generally better for like everyday wear. And I just think in terms of like, if you're wearing them for a long period of time, you're going to be wearing them every day, the more sort of support you can have on the back of your heel, the better. Secondly, you've got wedges. I feel like wedges are generally more of like a summer thing, but the good thing about wedges is that you kind of get, again, the elevation that you get with a high heeled shoe. So your foot is supported all the way from like the front of your, like the ball of your foot, we could say, all the way to the back of the heel. And I think that just makes them a lot more comfortable. They're sort of better for things like walking around a lot. So maybe if you're like going for like a shopping trip, or even if you're going to like a special occasion where you think you're going to want to like dance the night away, for example, I just think they're a really good option in terms of like comfort. The only thing to look out for with wedges is to make sure you're going somewhere where the ground surface is going to be level. So if you're going somewhere you know they're going to be cobblestones or gravel, I would probably give them a miss just because you're likely to twist your ankle. Finally, and this is probably like the most popular heel category, you've got stilettos. Now, I really love stilettos in terms of the way they look, almost like you're floating because the heel is so thin that it looks like you're kind of tiptoeing on nothing. And I think there's something really beautiful about that. But if we're going to be completely honest, they're probably not the most comfortable option. So I would say with stilettos, I would generally keep them for periods when you're going to be wearing them for less time or where you're going to be walking less far. I wouldn't wear them on a day-to-day basis because it's literally like you're walking on a pair of really thin twigs, and there's nothing at all comfortable about that. Moving on to mules, they're kind of like a slipper that's stylish enough to wear outside. So mules generally tend to be heeled, and because of this there are two things you need to consider. First of all, the width of the shoe, and secondly, the length. If they're a pair that has a strap that comes across the top of your foot, you need to make sure that the strap is sort of tight enough to hold your foot in place, especially if you're like me and you're narrow-footed. With the length of mules, the thing that I've noticed about them in terms of fit is that they tend to look better when there's a bit of a gap at the back, because if there isn't, it kind of looks like you're wearing shoes that you've kind of forced your foot into. Just make sure, for example, that if they are pointed, the way that they're cut accommodates the fact that it's a pointed toe shoe, so there's a little bit more space than usual. The only thing about this is that if, like me, you kind of have feet that are on the bigger side, it can kind of make your feet look even bigger than they are. So if you're kind of bothered about the fact that your feet might look bigger than they are, maybe go for a higher heel so that the length of your foot is kind of distributed along a sort of higher arch, if that makes sense. Or alternatively, you could just fully embrace your big-footed life like I have. The final category that I wanted to cover is trainers. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys, I'm not the biggest trainer girl in the world, but I decided to include them anyway just because I recognise that they are super popular. So there are four main things that you need to consider with trainers. First of all, the width of the trainer. Secondly, the fastening. Thirdly, the silhouette. And last of all, the purpose. Obviously, you need to consider your foot width, as with some of the previous categories. And I think the width of the trainer can actually be dependent upon the style of the trainer. So I've noticed, for example, that chunky trainers generally tend to be cut wider. So if, like me, you have narrow feet, then I would probably say, generally speaking, unless they are just a specifically narrow fitting style, chunky trainers are probably one to avoid. Moving on to the fastening, there are quite a few. I think the main ones that I've seen are obviously laces. Those are the most sort of popular fastening style. But I've also seen a few with Velcros. I've seen some, I'm sure, with zips as well. I think, to be honest, in terms of practicality, laces are probably the way to go, just because you can tighten them or loosen them as much as you want. Make sure that in terms of the fastening that you pick, it's kind of functional and not just for show. So I bought a pair of trainers from Guess last year, and I noticed that every time I took a step, they'd be sort of like slipping off my foot. So when I got back into my car, I kind of tried to tighten them, but I realised that actually you can't really tighten them past a certain point, and I need them to be tightened past that point because my feet are super narrow, and I hadn't realised it when I tried them on, but the trainers are actually super wide. So if you're going to be picking a pair of laces, make sure that you can tighten them to their maximum level, so that the shoe is kind of hugging your foot. Likewise, if you're going to pick a zip, make sure that the zip actually holds your foot in place and that it's not just sort of sitting on the side of the shoe looking pretty. With things like Velcro, it's really easy to like take them off when you need to and put them back on really quickly. I don't think that Velcro is necessarily the most elegant or most adultish, for lack of a better term choice, just because I think the last time I wore a Velcro pair of trainers, I was in primary school. I hate that noise that the Velcro makes. If you're in a situation where for some reason you need to take your shoes off like subtly or quietly, then the Velcro is just there.
Like, hey, this girl just took her shoes off.
Will you keep quiet?
Moving on to the silhouette, this is something that's just down to personal preference. So I tend to like trainers that are either kind of like in the middle of a sleek trainer and a chunky trainer. I don't actually own a pair of Nike Airs, but that kind of vibe. So they're kind of a little bit on the chunky side, but just sleek enough to not look overly chunky, if that makes sense. Or I tend to prefer a sleek trainer, kind of like the similar sort of design to, I guess, kind of Converse. Those sort of canvas style trainers with like a thinner sole and like a sort of narrower fit on the foot are just things that I personally prefer. It can also depend on your personal style. So for me, my style is quite dressed up and feminine, and I find that sleek trainers are easier to like dress up with, like dresses and skirts, for example, than like a chunkier trainer. There's something about chunky trainers to me that just kind of gives a very casual sort of vibe, and I do dress really casually on occasion, but on a day-to-day basis it's not the sort of style that I usually go for, and I tend to pick trainer styles that are more likely to be worn more frequently, with my sort of more dressed up or semi-casual kind of style. Finally, and perhaps most importantly when it comes to picking out trainers, is you need to consider the purpose. So I feel like there are trainers, but then there are trainers. So you need to consider, are you picking out trainers that you can wear, for example, for workouts or to go to the gym? Or are you picking out trainers that you can wear more sort of casually for kind of like day trips and things like that? Like my particular pair of running trainers now, they're kind of giving me like dad trainer vibes, and honestly, I don't want to say they're ugly, but they're definitely not like pretty. But there's kind of a reason for that, because obviously with running trainers, they can be fashionable, like I've seen some nice looking ones, but it's really weird. I found that the most comfortable running trainers are usually the ugliest ones. So I'm sure there's some sort of science in the way that they're sort of cut to make sure that your foot is sitting in the position that it should. And also in terms of the insole, so I kind of have a theory when it comes to the insoles of trainers. So if you put your hand inside of trainer, when you push down on the insole, it should kind of push back up your hand, so it should kind of be a little bit on the springy side. If you push down on the inside of a trainer and you get a hard abrupt stop rather than like the springy feeling, that's how it's going to feel when you're wearing them. So whenever you walk, rather than the springy feeling that's propelling you to take the next step, it's just going to be really uncomfortable, and the likelihood is you're going to want to take them off really quickly. So that brings me to the end of this video. I really hope you found it helpful in terms of picking out the perfect pair of shoes for you, whatever category you're looking for. I was going to cover sandals as well, but I figured since we're coming up to autumn and winter, I might do a separate video covering summer shoe styles in future. So if that's something you're interested in, then subscribe to my channel. Also follow me on Instagram and head over to my blog, shewalkstour.co.uk, where I post all things style and substance. Have a lovely rest of the day, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!
For better living, are you feeling good tonight? This thing got me thinking of life.